Welcome to Tavern Archery. I'm Johannes von Hammersbach, and after a day on the archery field, we come into the tavern, grab a pint, sit down, and talk about all things target archery. Prost. We're back in the tavern today with Master Godric of Hampton from the Barony of Enderwald from the Kingdom of the East. And Master Godric is going to show us today how to make arrows, from arrow blanks to getting arrows on target.
All right, welcome back. We have our arrows all tapered for the knock points. And we are using the classic knock, which has the little nipple on it in color black. They come in various colors, so it's shooter's preference. I'm going to be using a Jojan 6 jig. Now I'm going to bring the camera over here to kind of show you. This allows me to fletch 6 arrows at a time, and I have 3 of these, so I can do 18 arrows in a single sitting. And so I've got my jig, and it's already set to do 3 fletch. So I've got this little nipple here at the top, and that shows me where I'm going to put the odd feather, or the different colored feather, or the cock feather, as you will, as it's called. I use a straight fletch jig, which means it's going to have a straight. There are 2 other kinds of clamps. They're called helicals. There's a right helical for right wing feathers and left helical for left wing feathers. I use a straight one because a helical tends to add drag, and at lower poundages it really doesn't affect the arrow's accuracy. A lot of people think that because the arrow is spinning, the helical makes the arrow spin, that it acts like a bullet and aids in accuracy. And in actuality, the arrow doesn't spin fast enough to really have it aid in its accuracy. And I've shot both helicals and straight fletch, and there's no appreciable difference in the accuracy of the 2. So it's whatever your preference. If you like to shoot long distance and see your arrows, twist prettily up into the air, I mean, that's fine as well. But a straight fletch is kind of a more period style, so if you're also into that. On my jig, I don't know if you can see it very well, but I have a little line, and that is where the back of the fletch is going to go. That's going to put it down from the end of where the knock goes. That's going to put it down. It's going to leave a space between the knock and where the back of the feather is going to be. I like doing this because when you go to draw out of a back quiver, if you've got the feather too close to the knock, you end up fumbling with it. Here you can just grab it and then pull it out and be able to shoot it. All right, so the way that I do it is I'm going to put the knock on using Fletch Tight Platinum. You can get it from anybody that sells archery equipment. I get it in the little tubes. So I'm going to put the knock on with the Fletch Tight. And one of the things you want to look for when you put the knock on is you want to try to do it perpendicular to the grain. So when you look at the grain, here the grain of this shaft goes this way, goes horizontal. So if I turn that around, I want to take my knock and make sure that the grain is going this way. I want to make sure that my knock sits on there like this, so that when I put it on the string, I'm perpendicular to the grain. Now, with plastic knocks, this is not as important as if you're doing a self knock, which means you're actually cutting into the wood. When you're doing a self knock, if you don't do it perpendicular to the grain, what ends up happening is a lot of times is the string could actually split the arrow. With the plastic knocks, it's not as important to get it exactly perpendicular, but I like to do that for consistency because, as you saw earlier, when we spine an arrow, it spines differently depending upon where on the arrow, how we turn it. So here I'm going to find my perpendicular, which is like there. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fletch tight, and I'm just going to put a little bead of glue around where the knock's going to go, and then I'm just going to press it on. So I'm going to spin it around and make sure the glue gets evenly, and I'm going to press it on, and I'm going to make sure that my little nipple here is on top because my grain is going this way, and that way I've got it perpendicular to the grain. And then I'm just going to set it right into the jig. Okay? Just set it right into the jig. And so I'm going to do that to all 24 arrows. So here we go. I'm probably going to stop talking here. Make sure I've got my grain right. Yep. Okay. I'm going to spin it around. I'm going to press it on, wipe off any excess glue, and then set it into the jig. By doing this, this allows me to start fletching sooner. I don't have to put all the knocks on and then wait for the glue to dry. It'll dry as it sits in my jig. All right, so continuing on. Oops. And again, I'm going to be doing 18 of these at a time. The Jojan company is currently not making their products. I've been in contact with them. They're hopefully going to be back into production sometime early in 2021. I like the Jojan because it allows me to do more than one arrow at a time. There are other companies out there that make fletching jigs. Bitzenberger is one of them, just to mention the one that I can think of off the top of my head. But those are single jigs. As far as I know, Jojan is the only one that makes a multi-fletcher. And again, I've got to look for my, wipe off the excess glue and put it in there. So I'm going to continue to do this until I've got all 18 arrows on the jig. So now we have all 18. And so I usually have a towel or rag handy, which I didn't to start with. Okay, so that way I can keep the end of the applicator cleaned of any glue that builds up on the end. So now I'm going to take my clamp, and as I said before, I've got these marks on here. They're all the same distance from the end. And I'm going to now put the feather in. So this is the back end of the feather. This is the front end. And so I'm going to put it in there, and I'm going to make it so that the vein, that's this white part, the vein, is right even with that mark. And I'm just going to open it up just a little bit. All right. So the vein needs to sit right along the top edge of this clamp. And then this is where it gets particular, you want to put a bead of glue along the vein. Now you don't want a lot, you don't want to slobber it on. So it'll take some practice, but you want to just barely put a bead of glue on it. And then we're going to set it into the jig. I have a slot here and a little rounding there, so I'm going to set it into my jig. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I'm on where I'm supposed to be. And usually there's a little bit of overflow on the feather, so you go in and just kind of wipe that off. Again, appearances, you don't want globs of glue. And so I'm going to continue down the line, and we're going to keep the camera rolling so that we can do a time-lapse photography. Now, in theory, the Fletch-Tite actually dries pretty fast. So in theory, I should be able to get to my 18th one and then come back to the first one and start the process with the next color. So here I go. Again, we're going to set it in there. Make sure that I'm set properly and go to the next one. So we're going to continue to do this until we get all 18 yellow feathers on it. So I want to make sure, again, I want to go quickly, but I also want to go slow enough that I'm not putting too much glue on to the point where I've got a lot of glue that's spread over, spread out. How I do it is not intended to be the bend all, beat all. This is how you have to do it. The use because I am familiar with it and it works for me. There are many other ways that fletchers have that they do their fletching. They do their arrow prep, different products that they're going to use. So just because I use, or I'm in this video, I'm using a certain product or I'm using a certain piece of equipment, that doesn't mean that you have to use that product or that equipment. It means that it works for me. And I get really good results. So I'm hoping that if you're watching this, you're watching it and you're learning the process of making arrows and not necessarily the products or equipment. Although the equipment is kind of important if you're going to make arrows. And as I said, there are many different companies out there that make fletching equipment. And if you have questions as to what piece of equipment you should have, you can talk to one of your local fletchers, or you can even contact me. I'm on Facebook. My company is on Facebook. So at North Tower Archery. As you can see from this process, arrows are expensive. Okay, whether you're getting them pre-made by places like Lancaster Archery or Three Rivers or someplace like that, pre-made arrows are expensive, and mine are more expensive than that because I go the extra step of weighing and spining everything and making match sets. So that takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort. And as you can see from the process from start to finish, there's a lot of time involved with making arrows. So when you're paying whatever you're paying for arrows, know that the material cost of the arrow is not what you're paying for, really. You're paying for the artistry and the skill of the Fletcher and the time that they put into it. So I'm down to my last one here. We got one more to go. Now it seems like I've got a lot left, but I still have 6 more of these arrows that I've got to fletch. So those will go on the next batch when I get done. Oops, not in there quite right. And so my little mistake down here at the end gives me a point that you need to make sure that the knock is seated down into the receiver down here in order for, because if it's off to the side, your feather is not going to sit on it very well. All right, so I have gotten through the first 18. I am now going to, as I said, fletch tight dries. It dries fast. But it should dry enough so that I can take this clamp off and be able, then what I will do is I will rotate this clockwise 1 click. And so these receivers are set up so that I will go 1/3 away around because the shaft looks like a circle. So when I go to the next click, I will be 1/3 of the way around the circle. And so all the feathers will be, you'll have the top feather, and then you have it'll be 1/3, and then 1/3 away from that one. And so now you've got 3/3, which is the whole circle. Okay, so the way you're gonna do this is I hold the shaft down in place. I don't want it to move. And then I squeeze the clamp, and I pull it up. And so that's not dry enough to shoot, but it's dry enough for me now to be able to go like this, and I can now put on the next feather. And then the next feather is going to be blue. So I'm going to repeat the same process. You saw me, I was kind of like holding it, putting a little downward pressure on it to make sure that the knock turned. Now, I'm going to hold the arrow down again, I'm going to squeeze it, and I'm going to rotate it out of the jig. So that, but I want to make sure that I have squeezed the clamp so that it's completely off. so we should be able to come back. I'm going to clean off this. And we should be able to come back and do the same thing as we did with the yellow. This should be dry enough for it to stick. So you need to be very careful now, especially now, because you want to make sure you squeeze that and pull it off. Now that we've gotten 2 feathers on it, we don't want to mess it up till we have to go back. So hold the shaft down a little bit, squeeze it, and then roll it out. And look, we have it sit there like that. So now I'm going to rotate it and put the last feather on. Again, keeping my applicator clean. Nice thin bead. There we go. So that gets us our 18. And normally I would let these set after I have them, all 3 of them on for about 10 or 15 minutes. But just to show you what it looks like at the end, here we go. We have our completed shaft. Notice the distance between the knock and the end of the feather. That's so that when you grab it out of your quiver, especially the back quivers, you're not grabbing the feathers. So the next step is draw length. There'll be a separate segment on how to determine draw length. And then once we've determined the draw length, then we're going to cut and put the points on. So that'll be the next segment.
Thank you, Master Godric, for showing us the fundamentals of arrow making. We look forward to seeing you again in the tavern. Frost.
They long had shot so well, and no wonder, for truly they spend time gathered here. They spend time gathered here in tavern archery.